I'm John Schaefer. Welcome to podcast number 2, live from Schaefer Media World Headquarters in beautiful Albany, New York. Our guest today is a dear friend of mine, John Cooper, who is the Regional Vice President of Programming in the Hartford region for iHeartRadio. He oversees Albany, he oversees Poughkeepsie, and he oversees Sussex, New Jersey. And he's been on the radio in New York State since 1973 and inducted into the New York State Broadcasters Hall of Fame in 2014. The man is a legend. Hopefully you'll hear some stories you didn't know and enjoy. Welcome to podcast number 2 with the legendary Hall of Fame disc jockey.
Legendary.
Absolutely.
When you asked me to do this, I was thinking about it, and I realized that October marks my 45th year broadcasting continuously in New York State. And, that's really cool. And then I got to thinking about, 45 years ago, it was Watergate. It was Vietnam War was still on. They had just had a big concert at Watkins Glen with the band, the Allman Brothers, and the Grateful Dead. 600,000 people went to that show, supposedly.
Right.
A lot has happened since then. I was playing vinyl records, for God's sake. Oh, wait, vinyl's back.
Was it ever gone?
Yes, it was gone for a while.
It's funny because when you bring up vinyl records, when I first started, we were playing 45s on slip queuing 45s on the air. And I remember when I first came up here and Todd Pettengill had hired me at Fly 92 and I'm on the air on Saturday nights opposite Uncle Vito's house party. And I was so nervous, but I was trying to do a little fun, and we had a turntable that was on a cart with wheels. So for me to slip cue a record at that point, I had to wheel up the turntable, lean back, and turn on the mic and do all the. It was a whole ballet.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of things you had to do besides press buttons. That's for sure. The turntables that I had back at I think WOUR were in cement, so that when somebody walked across the floor, it wouldn't jostle the needle and make it skip or anything like that. And they were they were kind of out of reach too. We had to reach way back. We had 2 over here and 1 over here, and the 2 over here were below an air conditioning unit in the wall, which would freeze up and then drip down on the turntables. Those were fun times.
I was thinking a lot when I decided to do this. I was like, I got to sit down and talk to Coop. I mean, make it like we get together every month or two over at Wendy's on Route 7 in Latham and BS for an hour.
That's right. Nothing like a little chili and
eat healthy.
That's
And I was thinking back, and I'd asked you about that picture because the first time you and I met it's got to be 30 years now. It was my birthday, and Jerry Blair from Columbia Records had all of us out. So I was there, you were there. I don't remember who else.
I have no idea where I was. Where was that?
It was at Fridays over in Stuyvesant Plaza.
Could have been.
And that was the first time you and I had met. And then it was some years later till we reconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about that. It goes so fast.
How
did we get so old, John?
I'm not old. What are you talking about? No, I was, like I said, I was talking about, 45 years ago when I first started broadcasting. It was in Syracuse and then Utica and then here. But all the things that have happened since then, and when you think about it, the history, the Vietnam War is so far in the rearview mirror for everybody these days, except for those veterans who are not doing too well, who are ill. Watergate. Look what was going on in the country then. Look what's going on in the country now. It's kind of interesting that so much change is happening, yet things don't change.
People don't change.
And same with the vinyl records. They went away for a while. That's a hot thing right now. A lot of people do collect vinyl, and those box sets that keep coming out now feature, big, multi-disc vinyl collections of previously unreleased stuff.
Now, it's funny. I mean, talking about vinyl records, when I bought my house 4 years ago, I moved all my junk in the basement. I put all my CDs, and I've got 2,500 CDs.
Nobody plays CDs anymore.
They haven't come out of the basement since we've moved in, and that's 4 years. Everything is so convenient. Is that the...
Yeah, I mean, it's everything's at your fingertips. I mean, I used to have, I don't know, 10, 15,000 albums at one time. They're all on a backup floppy drive now, this big. That's my collection. I mean, I do have some vinyl and I do have some 45s. And I've got a couple old jute boxes too, which are a lot of fun. But you know, it's very convenient, very easy, and in most cases, you don't even need the backup hard drive anymore. You just stream it.
Well, and that's the funny thing about coming in here today and sitting in the studio, because back in the day, I just used the word back in the day.
Now you are old.
Well, yeah, apparently. But the walls would be covered with CDs or shelves for records and commercial carts to play. And the walls in here, it's barren.
You won't find a CD in here.
They're all out in the hall, I guess.
Out in the hall, but we're having J-Dog Junk Removal come and take that stuff away.
But it's so funny how it's the same, but it's different.
Well, I mean, consider what we all went through over the course of time. Like I said, when I started, the Vietnam War was still on, winding down, but then we got into different genres of music. That was pre, those two big Fleetwood Mac albums. It was pre all the hair bands of the '80s. It was pre-punk out of England, and all those musical things that happened that we still listen to now. And those were milestones, and there was some really good stuff that came out over the course of time that has stood up over time. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people who are, in their teens and high school, college, get turned on to some of this stuff, and that just keeps perpetuating classic rock in particular. I find that fascinating. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, Led Zeppelin, all those, they just keep, kind of self-renewing as we're going along.
They tell stories that resonate with any 20-year-old or 18-year-old or 17-year-old.
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, if you have that connection and the music is of quality, it's going to hang around. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, but okay. Over the last, say, 10 years, what do you think is going to stand up over the course of time?
Well, I think that's the hard part, and I think that goes to my question I was going to ask you about how has radio changed, because everything is so spread out now. You go to the internet, you can go to satellite radio, and you can break down into very niche places. There are a lot of great bands. I mean, the stuff that I listen to.
Well, I think if you want to talk about the biggest change in radio, I don't know who said this originally, but it struck a chord with me. Radio used to be the social media. That was it. I mean, you were here playing records, you were introducing music, you were talking about concerts. You basically had your finger on the pulse of what was going on in the community. We still do, and that's where radio hasn't changed. But what has changed is how people use radio. It isn't call up the request lines anymore. It's go on social media, go on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and it's used a different way. But there is so much information out there that people can gather through social media that the way radio used to be years ago, where we were the connection to everything that was going on in town, that's changed a little bit. Still the connection, we still get out there, there's still a lot of visibility for the radio stations, and there's a lot of love for the radio stations from the public. I mean, the number of people who listen to radio hasn't really changed.
No,
I mean,
they're just not listening as long as they had in the past.
Well, they may not be listening as long, but they're still listening. Most of the population listens almost every day, every week for something, whether it's music, whether it's news and information or what have you. It's still very important. How people get introduced to new stuff, that's a little different.
That's a challenge.
That's where radio used to come in a lot, was introducing new music. Not so much anymore. There's a lot of communication that goes on between people about what they like, and individuals turn other individuals on to certain music. And, there's some, once in a while a band will play like at the Palace Theater. They sell out. I'm like, huh?
How'd that happen?
Yeah. Who are those guys?
I was at one of them a few months ago, that Vance Joy.
Yeah.
And that place was packed.
Yeah, of course.
And I think the artists are out there. The way people find out about them, as you say, it's changed.
It's different, yeah. And I think, we've had to reflect that change over the course of time in radio.
So tell me how all these changes when you and I worked together, and that's when we reconnected again back when I came back to Albany in 1996 at Pix as a salesperson, you had we were owned, I don't remember, I think it was SFX at that point.
All I know is in a very short period of time, we went through 5 ownership changes. When I started at Pix, Merv Griffin owned it, Mr.
Yep,
Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and
yep.
whatever. But he owned it and sold to another company, who sold to another company, who sold to another company, and eventually Clear Channel, and now that morphed into iHeartMedia.
How has that changed what you do? Now you oversee the Albany market, you oversee Pix, as you've done for, God knows, it's forever.
See, you're making me feel old again.
No, you're not old, you're experienced.
Oh, is that what it is?
And
Okay.
legendary.
Legendary. Hall of Fame, too. Don't forget
Oh,
about
I'm not
that.
going to forget about the Hall of Fame, don't you worry. Um, but how has those changes in this corporate environment, how has that played out for you?
I'm always curious to move forward. I don't like to just sit back and necessarily get nostalgic all the time, and that's the way it was, and that's how we should do stuff. I look to see where we're headed, and I really like the fact that I'm with a company that is really interested in not just radio, but beyond and how to reach people. I mean, iHeartMedia is the fingers are in a lot of different areas when it comes to audio distribution, which I think is great. And the connection that we have, the programmers in iHeartMedia that we have, that we can talk to each other, we can get information from each other, and everything is so instantaneous, just like it is for everybody else. But I think when you have leadership that wants to embrace the future and where we're headed, I really think that's an important thing.
I think
And it makes things not get uninteresting, it makes things very interesting.
it was kind of cool because you could see the groundwork happening when Clear Channel bought all the rest of the properties that they could at that point, and then they bought Live Nation, and you start to see some of those synergies. Now those synergies are kind of exponential
Hmm.
when you look at it.
Yeah.
Um, One of the big things iHeart does each year is that iHeart Radio Festival out
Yeah,
in
the
Las
iHeart
Vegas every
Music
year.
Festival is huge. I mean, that's a whole another aspect of what this company does, which I think is great, and it extends all our brands, which is beneficial. Um, One of the guys that actually heads up the division that does those shows is a guy I went to college with, who I
Right.
did radio with out in Syracuse, John Sykes, and in fact, he and I reconnected when I went to college. He was when I was really young. I lived in Schenectady till I was about 9, and I had left and kind of forgotten, who was in Schenectady that used to be playmates that went to Elmer Avenue School or whatever. But I get back to college, or I get to college, and one of the first few days, John comes up to me and says, "Hey, remember me?" And it's like, okay, yeah, we used to go to Hoffman's Playland and have birthday party, get-togethers there, and we've stayed connected ever since. And he's had a remarkable career in the music and radio business. He was involved with MTV for a
Right.
while, and now he spearheads a lot of the different music and entertainment events that iHeart puts on, which is very cool.
Let's go to, you were talking about Vietnam earlier and at the start of your career. One of the things you've done, and I admire you greatly for what you've done with the Leather Stocking Honor Flight, where you help these veterans, you get them down to Washington, D.C. to go and, I don't know, maybe is it get the respect, or is it to show them the respect?
It's Yes, it's a way of saying thank you. And for the Vietnam veterans, it's a way of saying welcome home. Because when they came back, they did not get the welcome home that they deserved. They were spit on. They did not want to wear their uniforms. And if you look back at the time, it was a very, very difficult time for a lot of people in this country. Those guys were being sent over there. They were drafted. They didn't have a choice.
Right.
They went over there and they were put in a situation that was basically no win. And they came back and they were put in a situation where it was basically no
Right.
win. I mean, I understand both sides of the issue. I mean, when I was, I don't know, 16, 17, the draft was in full swing. I knew it was coming. I had to go for a draft card, and fortunately, I think it was 73. Um, I had a draft card, and that's when they stopped the draft, or right around that time. So I was pretty fortunate. But I remember a lot of friends and family members who were trying to, not have to go, whether it was to go up to
Right.
Canada or be conscientious objectors or whatever. It was a very bizarre time, and I understand that. But I also have a lot of sympathy for our Vietnam veterans that went there, that were in country. What they were exposed to, what they had to go through was absolutely horrendous. And they still have to carry that with them now. And what makes it even worse is a lot of them have been impacted by the chemicals that were used, Agent Orange, napalm, all that stuff. All these guys are sick, and it's really a shame. And you know what? They should be honored. They should be honored by going on a leather stocking honor flight. But that whole thing started with the World War II veterans,
Right.
which was a little bit different only because their memorial wasn't completed until 2004. And at that point, that's what, 60 years after World
Right.
War II ended. These guys now are in their 80s at that time. And somebody came up with a great idea of getting them down there to experience their memorial at no cost. And that's where Honor Flight came from. And
And you went all in on that. You and Rhonda jumped
well,
way in on that.
it was hard not to. The first experience was being a guardian to accompany a World War II vet down. I wasn't involved with Leather Stocking Honor Flight at the time. I knew about him, but I was a guardian for a really cool guy who was in the Pacific Theater. We got talking before the flight actually went, and had an incredible day together along with 50, 60 other people. And that experience was remarkable. It was remarkable. You leave Albany and you're with these guys and you see them interact. And at that point, it was a lot of mostly World War II veterans. And to hear them tell their stories, to hear them connect with each other and share their experiences, and then to give them an experience where they get to go to the memorials, go to Arlington National Cemetery, get together to, for the dinner before we come back. It was incredible. And after that, yeah, I was all in, and so was Rhonda. And Rhonda's the veteran coordinator now.
I just think it's just so amazing. I've been reading a book by Brown, and she had mentioned a statistic, which I had never heard before, from the Iraq War in 2003. Uh, as it went on, more vets died from suicide than did during the war.
Hmm.
I don't think most people are aware of the trauma, and you talked about the trauma earlier, but seeing what you do with the honor flight, and then gone a couple of times to the airport to watch them off, and you can't not feel proud and not be emotionally connected to it and go, wow, you know what? These guys made some sacrifice, and it's nice to give back to.
They made a great deal of sacrifice, and some of their buddies made the ultimate sacrifice,
Right.
and that hangs heavy on those guys. But when you hear stories from the World War II vets about the fighting on Iwo Jima or the Battle of the Bulge, I mean, to hear it direct, that's living history. You can watch a movie, you can watch a documentary, but when you hear it from these guys themselves, and the World War II veterans are so humble. They came back, they went back to work. Now, a lot of them will tell you, oh, yeah, I went back to work and that was that, and I kind of buried it. And, post-traumatic stress, they had that as well. It kind of was, shelved a
Right.
little bit. And it's more recognized now, and the symptoms are more recognized now. And I think that's important because I've talked to a lot of the vets that have come back from Afghanistan and Iraq when I do the Veterans Day takeover on Pix 106 when they're guest disc jockeys.
You beat me to my next
Well,
point.
a lot of them have some issues, and it's great because they'll talk about it, and that's a really good step. But we try to connect them. If there have been a couple of occasions where I've been able to connect a vet with somebody I know who deals with post-traumatic stress, and that's been helpful. And it's The bottom line is, when I think about it, I do this in tribute to my dad. He was a World War II Navy veteran. He was a Navy chaplain. He served in the Pacific. He didn't get to go see the World War II
Right.
memorial. He died a while ago of dementia. And, if I can do something small in his honor, that's great. That's what I want to do.
Well, you know what? And I look at it and I think about it. It's not small what you do. What you do is big. That's big stuff. Helping these guys.
It's small compared to what they did.
It's small compared to what they did, but it's big. And you took it to the next place, which is doing the Veterans Weekend on the station. That's awesome. You're taking your talent and sharing it with everybody else. I think that's incredible.
Well, I've gotten to meet some amazing people, whether it's World War II vets, Korean War veterans, Vietnam veterans, Iraq, Afghanistan. There are incredible people who sacrifice their home life, what they know, and the freedom here in this country to protect our freedom, to go over there and put themselves in the line of fire, basically. And that's, I don't know if I could do that.
I don't know that I could.
So I give them all the credit in the world.
I look at you and I think we all have second acts in life. And I've watched you the last 10 or so years become something more, as a person, as a personality, as you've taken all those earlier experiences and built on them. You had asked me earlier, why am I doing this? And the answer to that was, I think there's incredible people around that have great stories that we all don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
How I can tell you how I define success now, and I didn't know how to define it for me until fairly recently. And success to me was not being rich and having the house and the beautiful wife and the fancy car and to me, it's freedom.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's the opportunity to be creative, the opportunity to talk to people like you. And I cherish your friendship. I mean, you were best man at wedding number 2. So
that's right. Wedding number
2. We won't speak any further about wedding number 1, which was in Las Vegas. But
those are the kinds of things we talk about at Wendy's.
Yeah, that's what happens at Wendy's. But what is success? So success to me more is freedom and being able to hear stories, to find ways to better myself. So if I can share some of that with people, mm-hmm. and maybe, God forbid, make a couple of dollars doing it, who knows? But that's why. But what's success to you today?
I don't understand that, Claude. How do I define success?
How do you define success for you?
That's kind of weird because I could say success is in some ways contentment, that I know that and I'm confident that in what I've been able to do, and I look back and like when we started this interview, to look back and say, wow, you know what? Over the course of this amount of time, I've really done a lot. You don't realize it because you're caught up in it as you go along. So there's that. But on the other hand, no, it's not contentment because I'm not done.
No, you are not.
I'm not done. And I don't think I ever will be done, because the minute you say you've gotten to a certain point that you wanted to get to, you're done.
Right.
And that's not happening. I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, I still am excited about coming in here every day. And I've said this about radio since the beginning. You never know what you're going to walk into every day, whether it's something that's happening in the world, whether it's something that's happening in music, whether it's something that's happening down the hall. You never know what you're walking into in this job. And it changes all the time. And you do have to think quick on your feet. And you do have to morph into something. You have to keep going. And if you reach a state where, okay, yeah, I've done everything I need to do, then bye-bye, good, see ya. And at some point, I may do that. I may say, okay, I'm done. I'm turning, hanging up the headphones, turning off the microphone. I'm out of here. I'm going to go sit on the beach. When that's going to happen, who knows? But, the beauty of it is it's still a fascinating medium, and it's great to be here every day.
I think it's awesome.
So I guess I don't know if that answers your question about
No,
success,
that's
but it's more about, never, having a goal but never getting there because you want to just
keep getting
pushing.
better.
Yeah.
And I guess that's that entrepreneurial idea of why I started doing this was to talk to people and
Yeah.
what is their definition? How have they gotten there?
I think one of the things that's changed a little bit as I've gotten older is I don't worry so much about some of the stuff I used to worry about. I mean, I used to be in a panic going on stage and just saying, "Hey, everybody, here's the Jay Giles band." I'd worry about that all day long. Now it's like, okay, here's the Jay Giles band. Have fun. No, I mean, it's just, it, I don't know. There's a little bit more. It took me a long time to get to that place.
Right.
And yeah, there's still moments where, I'm asked to speak or do something where, you get nervous. But
Sure.
I think, the more you do it, the more often you do it, and, the amount of time that's been invested in it over years, has brought me to a point that it's more comfortable.
Right.
It's like baseball or football. Everybody gets the butterflies before they do something, or go out on the field or whatever, and you still get that, but it's not like it was when I was in college and I freaked. I didn't want to get out there at all. And you hide behind the microphone in a radio station. You don't have to be in front of 100,000 people, or you don't have to look into a camera necessarily to do TV.
Right. It's funny. I've been out now 13 years on my own out of the radio business, and I still walk in here and I see so many familiar faces. We were talking to Terry O'Donnell earlier. I popped my head in the GY newsroom, and there's Mike Patrick,
Yeah.
who back in the day was Shadow Michaels. And you talk about going up on stage. Shadow and I were on stage to introduce New Kids on the Block in 1989. and that's the image I have of him. And it's hard to hear him on the news when I think of, hey, that's the guy that was on stage introducing New Kids on the Block in 1989. I, you know, I think to your point here when you're talking about success and getting better and going forward, one of the happiest days for me was when Kristen Delaney had called me and say, "Hey, Coop is going in the New York State Broadcasters Hall of Fame." I go, "I don't have friends that go in the Hall of Fame."
I don't know.
I was like,
that was a shock to me and a real honor. I mean, when I think about it, I went into the class I went into, what was it, 2014, I think. Mike Francesa was in there, which was cool, and he and the Mad Dog and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But what really hit me hard this year was I saw who was going into the Hall of Fame, the Broadcasters Hall of Fame this year. And what was very weird to me was one of my early idols in radio was Dan Ingram. And he wasn't in the New York State Broadcasters Hall
He
of Fame.
wasn't?
He was probably, in my opinion, one of the best top 40 disc jockeys that I ever heard. Him and, for people around here, Boom Boom Brady. But he was the first one I ever met. But Dan Ingram was so good on the air in the top 40
Right.
format. I mean, he was just incredible. And to listen to him and his off-the-cuff remarks, and he'd hit the post when the songs, it was just, he was incredible. But he wasn't in the New York State Broadcasters Hall.
How is that possible?
I don't know. He's being inducted this year
Posthumously. Ugh.
which is, it was a surprise. And the fact that I'm in a class or a group or in a Hall of Fame with these guys, there's so many of them that are so talented. That's a pretty humbling thing.
Well, it's funny because Dan Ingram was the one who gave me the bug when I listened to him growing up on Long Island on WABC. The guy was a machine. He was just so good, so smooth, and could talk. Wow, I want to be like that.
Well, that was a whole different era for radio with the cousin Brucey's, who's still on Sirius XM, which cracks me up, and he's still doing it what he does. And you know what? I give him a ton of credit for doing that. And you had cousin Brucey, you had Dan Ingram, you had Ron Lundy. The whole lineup at WABC was so popular, and everybody in New York listened to those guys.
I'm going to ask you one last question. Go back to the Hall of Fame for a second. And something you had said earlier was, how do you get into the Hall of Fame and then not take that as the finish line? What do you say to yourself that I'm going to keep going? I'm not done yet.
To me, it was like I told you, it was a surprise. It's an honor. But yeah, I'm not done yet, and that's the bottom line. I'm not done yet. I'm still having a blast, and to be recognized by the New York State broadcasters, and it was just it was really really an honor, and I really appreciate the fact that they have me in there. I don't, I'll look at myself and say I'm not really qualified, but that's cool. And I know they have the video of our acceptance speeches or whatever out at Syracuse University. That's one of those things where I don't want to see that again. It was fun. It was cool. I could have been better. That was one of those things. I guess that's the challenge. You do something like that and you want to do better. It's like I told you about going up in front of an audience to speak. You walk off the stage, you say, "Oh, I should have said that, I should have said that, I should have done this." And so you strive to do it better each time.
Right.
So I think that's where I'm at.
One more Hall of Fame question, but
Another one?
a different Hall of Fame. You actually have or I don't know if it's still there or not, but a letter that you had written to U2 back in 1980 when you were at QBK. And is that still at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
I haven't been back to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame since I saw the letter in there. I don't think it is, only because, or it may be in the archives, filed
Right.
away somewhere. It was part of a U2 commemorative display, or how they in museums they'll take a
Right.
section and do a special gallery, and it was in there, and it was it was pretty cool because it was easily recognizable because WQBK had some of the worst stationery ever designed. It unlike the Rolling Stones, the tongue and lips logo, this was a big Q that looked like a tongue was coming out as part of the Q.
Right.
And it was orange or yellow and red
And hideous.
But I wrote to U2's management and told them, yeah, I think this album's pretty good, and here's a couple of songs I think have potential, because they sent it to the radio station in advance of its release in the United States. And I had heard them earlier in the year because I had been in England.
Right.
And they were already playing them on the BBC and on the radio over there. So I was kind of familiar with them. And then they sent the first album and they wanted feedback. What do you think will work in the United States? So that was the gist of the letter, was to say how, I think this band has real potential. And here's some of the songs that I think from this album that are really cool. So they put the letter in there, which, I'd totally forgotten about, but somebody told me it was on the display. So I checked it out, and sure enough, there it was, which is another thing that's been very cool over the course of time, is to be able to see a lot of these bands when they first start. U2 playing here at J.B. Scott's, the Talking Heads, even Bruce Springsteen playing the Palace Theater, back in the day. Dire Straits at the Hullabaloo and Rensselaer, the Police at the Hullabaloo and Rensselaer, those clubs. I mean, that was a really, really cool time for this community in particular because it was very active.
Now, it was funny because a few weeks ago, David Byrne was in town, and I went to that show, and I got to tell you, that was one of the best shows I've ever seen. It was so thought out, so creative, so unique, and so musically challenging. I was blown away by that. So somebody like David Byrne and Talking Heads making that evolution to these places. It's going to bring me to my last question, because we always talk
What is
about
your last question? We could go
Oh,
on.
you know
and
I'm
on.
full of it.
We could go on and on for hours, I'm sure.
I'm sure, but I'm going to wrap it up with this one. Is because when we get
Don't
to
ask
lunch,
me my favorite concert of all time.
I was just going to ask you your favorite concert of all time.
I have no idea. There have been so many, and then so many highlights. Springsteen would have to have a separate place. Some of the bands that were in their infancy when I saw them, Elvis Costello, I saw at 4 Acres in Marcy, New York, outside of Utica. That was incredible. I mean, I don't know. There's just too many to count. I've seen some incredible shows. Paul McCartney at the Times Union Center was good, but I'd seen him 3 or 4 other times, and he was good then too. I mean, it's really difficult to say. I mean, there have been so many great shows at the Times Union Center alone, or the Palace
Yep.
Theater, the Kinks at the Palace Theater. I mean, they're just popping into my head. Tina Turner at SPAC. I mean, all those shows over the course of time. I mean, you just can't nail one and say that was the ultimate.
You bring up a good point. You and I have seen so many shows that it's hard to pull out one and say it's funny. I get something new out of every show I see now, and something that I enjoy. Or last night was Alice Cooper, and I've never seen Alice Cooper, and holy cow, this guy is what, 72?
Dude does an incredible show.
Incredible show. It was so much fun. So, well, that's it. Listen, thank you for doing this with me.
My pleasure.
It was fun. I love hearing the old stories. I love hearing
Don't
the new
say
stories.
the word old.
More important, the new stories, because
Yeah.
that's what keeps
Well,
everything moving along.
Yeah, well, there's always going to be something new.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Let's go get lunch.